Charlie podcast. Yo, it's the Really Charlie podcast. Yeah, it's the Really Charlie podcast. Bumping through your broadcast. Grab a chair and fill your glass.
Hey, you are listening to WNB 1 Radio. I'm Charlie Perry, and this is the Really Charlie podcast. Today's guest is the Groovalados. This is take 2. All right. Thank you. Welcome on board, and I appreciate you coming and taking some time to share your craft. And I want to give you your flowers while you're standing, and just praise everything that you're doing. I said I've seen that I was a fan of yours. I really admire the sound. Really, it's just got that groovy. You got your own style, your own, and that's what I like about it. Is too many people are imitating others, and it just drives me crazy. I heard that song last year. Just a different artist, a different musician. So, all right. So let's introduce us, yourselves to WNB1, and we'll start with you and go all the way over to the youngster down there. All right.
I'm Chuck V. I am the chief audio engineer of Polyphonic Studios, and I am the bass player for the Groovalados.
Very nice.
All right. I'm Waleem, the Funky Professor. I'm the head of production for Polyphonic Studios, but I'm also a co-founder of the Groovalados, keyboard player, one of the vocalists.
Very nice.
Resident songwriter. And by the way, fan of your podcast. Thank you for the people in the community.
It means a lot.
Light, the folks who bring to light. It's really important work. So it's an honor to be on here, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Honor to have you.
I'm the ZYG808. I'm a staff producer and staff engineer at Polyphonic Studios, drummer, co-producer, and also one of the vocalists with the Groovalados, and also podcast host, radio show host, singer, songwriter, DJ. I do a lot.
Oh, we got to talk about the podcasting. We definitely got to do that. All right. The first time I met you was in Falmouth, I believe. The craziest thing is I heard of you, Waleem, right?
Waleem, yeah.
Waleem. I heard of your name years ago, and then finally put a name with the face was amazing. So, you keep up the good work and all that you do. And I'm glad that you're inspiring that young man next to you to hold on to family tradition and do what's right. Let's talk about who inspired you and to get the group together and inspired you, whether it was a young man or up and coming man. Who inspired you to do music?
Well, inspired me to do music. I come from, on my mother's side, music family. My grandfather came to this country from Barbados, and he was one of 14 kids, and most of them were trained musicians. He was classically trained as a pianist. And he was sent to the United States to study medicine, but he wanted to pursue music, which his father didn't see as a gentleman's profession, basically. And he ended up as one of the producers, musicians in the Brill Building, and with the Musicians Union. And he had a band, and I remember he refused to go south of Philadelphia because he's like, if they can hang me from a tree, I'm not going there. So
I don't blame him.
So
don't blame him.
The East Coast was a big part of his tour circuit. He actually played the band club a few times back in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And Boston was part of his circuit. But that I would say he was one of my big influences, definitely. And was my original piano teacher. And but coming from a music family, it's just sort of something that comes up. I started actually as a viola player. But that was the origin there, I guess you could say.
So you was gonna play something no matter what.
Oh yeah, yeah. Then I
Awesome.
went to music and art high school in New York, and so I was surrounded by. To give you an example, the guy who was the year ahead of me, he just passed away last year. Sharnette Moffett, bass player,
Hmm.
jazz bass player. I remember when Wynton Marsalis came to visit our high school to hear Sharnette play bass and actually jammed with the jazz band. And I remember Dizzy Gillespie coming in and jamming with our jazz band.
Hmm.
So that was part of my, that was part of my training, I guess you could say.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm gonna try to let me try to share this on social media. Um, Now you growing up in the same house,
Yes,
you know,
basically. Yeah.
obviously the man in the middle inspired you, So
Yeah.
I my dad was always, he inspired me with many things. One of the things that he inspired me was writing. But we didn't know that we had that in common until I was 15 years old. And then the craziest thing is that when my writing started getting better, he ended up passing away in '92.
Mm.
So, but I wish he was still around. Some of the things that he had. So I'm pretty sure you two working together is something special, and I hope you keep, just understand that that's a blessing, especially with somebody like me that doesn't have my dad around. Um, I wish so cherish everything that you all are doing. I don't care what it is. Um, all right. So you had an event just about a week ago at the band club,
Mm.
and you just mentioned about you know your kin playing at the band club. The one thing that I noticed is that when you guys are playing at the band club, you were on the other side,
Mm.
and I wish you had that feeling in the back room, in the teak room, because that is
I,
a special place.
I know it is a special place. Back in, I want to say it was 2000.
Hmm.
I had my youth theater group here in New Bedford,
Okay.
and Oversoul Theater Collective, and we did our production in the back room,
Very
and
nice.
got to. It was nice to be able to bring young people and bring that youth energy into that space, knowing the history, knowing that Duke Ellington used to hang
Hmm.
out there, knowing that my grandfather played there, knowing, Count Basie played there, knowing Lionel Hampton played there. So I got that backroom experience, 20 something years ago. And I one of the reasons why we thought it was so important to play there was because of the legacy of that club and that well, I mean, especially for these two young men have on their resume, they played the Cape Verdean Band Club,
Hmm.
and but also to just sort of
Yes.
honor the space, and honor that as this is one of the places my grandfather played. So here I am,
So true.
keeping that tradition going. And
Yeah.
And for me, one of the places my great grandfather played. Yeah.
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
tell them some of your influences, drummer.
Some of my influences as a drummer specifically.
Yeah,
Okay.
since we're
Well,
talking groovalato and
because
session
I
playing.
think you named one of them, Lionel Hampton, because he drums also vibraphone.
Hmm.
That's because those are both my instruments.
Wow.
John Blackwell Jr. is one that comes with Art Blakey also. Questlove from the Roots, Max Roach. I'm trying to because I have a whole list of drummers that's like a mile long. I'm trying to remember all of them. There's a lot.
Funky drummer.
Funky Jump, Clyde, Stubblefield, James Brown. Yeah, there's
Nice.
another. Yeah,
Nice.
and then one of the newer guys, his name's Anderson Paak. He
Hmm.
he drums and he does vocals while he drums, and that's the thing I do. I do live. I started doing that when I started rapping and started singing.
Good. The Anderson Park. I don't know how I missed him, but I missed him until when he ended up
In Silk Sonic with Bruno
Yeah,
Mars.
and I'm like,
That
how did I
album
miss this
is
dude?
that album is goated.
His
It's
Love
Bootsy
that
Collins
album.
in there, you know. Gotta
Yes.
it's just
Didn't he executive produce that album or
Yes,
not?
he did.
He did. Yeah.
the the big mistake they made for Anderson .Paak was marketing,
Mm,
because right now hip hop does not mean what it meant in the 90s and early
I
2000s.
agree.
And in fact, what they're calling hip hop isn't even hip hop.
Mm,
There's a difference between rap and hip hop.
yes.
And what they're doing is not hip hop, but it's called hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is
Plus,
when
they've
you
co-opted it. They've co-opted a culture for industrial purposes.
not just industrial, but social, socio-political
Mm-hmm.
downturn. You know, that's a different conversation. But the thing is, when you come out as a hip hop artist, even though what you're really doing is hip hop,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be taken seriously,
True.
because for all of the Anderson Paaks and a couple of, like, even the young folks who passed, for example, Lil Peep and XXX Tentacion, I wouldn't even really call what they were doing hip hop. They were more so doing like indie pop kind
Mm-hmm.
of stuff. But
I've heard people they've referred to them specifically as like trap rock and rock rap.
But they were doing, but what they were doing, it was musical and it was interesting, but it was not hip hop.
Yeah.
But the thing is, so
and some of XXX's stuff, there are elements of it, but he did a lot.
He was more new agey.
Yeah.
He was more new agey, but you know, so what happens is when you come out as a hip hop artist now, it unfortunately it diminishes.
Yeah.
It diminishes you, and that's what happened to Anderson .Paak.
Yeah.
It's like they're allowing people to tell their story. You know, if you're affiliated with hip hop and you allow people to change it for all those various reasons that you're talking about, what happens is people now start telling your story, um, a little watered down version of it, and it's not good, you know. So I think that as long as you continue to get the message out and challenge what they're doing, um, but you know, the media, they're giving out the awards, so they're gonna mix it up, and people are gonna play to their liking, you know, because they're actually, you know, money talk. So you know, but I think if the ground roots and organic type groups like yourself end up, you know, kind of just giving that message like you just did, you can actually honestly believe it and say, you know what, that's right. That's right. I didn't think about it like that. So the
Well, I've been what they call an indie artist
mm-hmm.
for about 33 years.
Yes.
And it was a decision I made 33 years ago. I was offered a contract, and I looked at the contract and said, "This doesn't look right." And I took it to an attorney, and the attorney looked at it and said, "Yeah, it doesn't look right because it's not right."
Mm-hmm.
And what I instead did was press the record myself.
Yes.
And put it out and figured out how to get, because one of the things I learned, right, let me tell you this straight up true story.
Mm-hmm.
When I got to college, of course, get to college, you're 18. You can't get in a nightclub because you got to be 21 or older.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Boston, you can sometimes have to be 25. So what I realized was, if I called all the record companies that I knew in New York, and I knew kind of all of them,
Mm-hmm.
who had 12 inches, and said, I'll pump your record in Boston if you send me copies. So I would take copies of these 12 inches, and of course, I'm going to the doorman with an armful of records,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just like waving me in to go to the DJ.
Wow.
Not carding me, not charging me, not anything. So I was getting into like the Gallery,
Mm-hmm.
all those clubs on Lansdowne Street, using that same method. So when it came time for me to put my record out, I just knew, go here, give it to this DJ. Go here, because I knew all those DJs.
Yes.
Go to WRVB, give it to him.
Mm-hmm.
Go to WIL. Back then, Stephen Hill was the program director for WILD. You know, Stephen Hill, who's now like vice president.
BET, right?
Yeah, BET.
Yeah.
Back then, he was
Just talking about him this week.
Yeah, but back then, WILD in Boston. Who knew?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of the things he did to help my record out was he used it for a commercial. So I was getting ASCAP spins off of WILD because it was behind a commercial that was playing like 10, 12 times a day.
Nice.
So little helpful stuff like that. But knowing the record pools too. But that was part of being indie. And the thing was, you can control your own destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Where it really came to light was around 2000. I put out a CD called "Thief in the Night," and back when you still actually printed music,
Mm-hmm.
and I had put together an open mic tour initially,
Okay.
going up and down, and I set out my area. All right, New England. I'm going to go down to New York, and I'm going to go down into DC and DMV area because they had back then spoken word and open mics were still really big.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that on the circuit, you play that circuit, and what you have is merchandise, and you sell your merchandise, and you have your stickers and whatnot. So we go out on the circuit, and I sold my CD, and was able to. And the funny thing is, when CD sales pick up, they pick up
Mm-hmm.
because it suddenly now becomes a hot property. So I was able to move hand to hand that CD about close to 14,000 copies,
Wow.
and it would be one of the points of the reprint was I had 2,000 copies. I I was in New York, and it was during summer stage, and that particular day they had reggae acts on. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
out there with my locks flowing
Yes.
and holding up my CD, and they're thinking, "Oh, this must be one of the bands that played." So
Mm-hmm.
I moved 2,000 CDs right there in Central Park, not even being one of the performers, just looking like one. But what
That's
ended up
it.
happening was because of that, it then moving 2,000 units and having them reorder that quickly, that then triggered, oh, this must be a hot record.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a different game now with digital
Yeah, it
and the
is.
digital system and the digital stream. In some ways, it's easier, and in some ways, it's a little more difficult. One of the difficult aspects is in terms of the marketing. The funny thing is, digital has now pushed recording back to where it was in the early 1900s as
Mm.
far as its value to the artist.
Okay.
Because back then you didn't make your money from the record. You made the record got out, it played on radio, and because it was playing on radio, you booked the clubs. That's where your money came from.
Okay.
And that's what it's now back to.
Yeah, it's I mean, I try not to ever second guess or underestimate the value of a musician. Only because my cousin Anton was a bass player, and and seen how hard he worked, and I never underestimated him. And he's had some great things happen to him for health reasons. He had to stop playing,
Mm.
but for him to pass away, several years ago, and his name still being mentioned, it's nice. It's nice to hear some
Yeah,
stories about him and how great he was, and so I miss him. And every now and then I get to hear something from him,
oh yeah,
um, or at least something that he kind of originated, and other people are kind of you know duplicating it
yeah, yeah.
and playing it. So, anyways, I see that you have a studio, and let's talk about that studio. Let's
All right.
talk about its name, where you know.
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
would have to backtrack a little bit.
All right, go ahead. Backtrack.
Because it ties into what you were just saying with your
Hmm.
cousin.
Hmm.
A lot of our predecessors left us roadmaps and templates
Mm.
and blueprints,
Yes.
and sometimes it's a matter of studying them. And to understand the studio we call Polyphonic Studios is the name. I have to trace it back to the beginning of the Groovalados, and to some extent trace it back before that.
Mm.
I became fascinated with recording probably when I was in second grade. My mother had a reel to reel, and
Mm.
again had one of those Panasonic cassette decks, and just the whole thing of capturing
Very
sound,
nice.
making my own little radio shows and that kind of thing. So that was my origin recording and the interest in recording, and then finding out my grandfather produced records, and finding that out because one of my classmates in third grade, her dad came in and talked to us about producing records. The late great Marty Scheller, who worked with Mongo Santa Maria among others. And he came in and talked about arranging and recording. And when I went home and talked about, yeah, he was studying on recording, and that's when I found out, well, that's what your grandfather did. But having also um, studying templates, again, having gone into the music industry, having been signed to a major label, having been completely disillusioned and getting out of the contract with the major label and getting away from music for a minute, it all started with just going and playing for fun at an open mic and meeting a gentleman named James Wolfe, who it turned out had been one of the latter day session players at Motown.
Wow.
And he introduces me to a drummer in Wareham named, stage name Eddie Ray Johnson, given name Billy Atkins. And Billy had played with Wilson Pickett and played with Rufus Thomas, and
Very nice.
as a pickup drummer, touring drummer. And I had a background as a session player. So it was all of us had been kind of burnt with the business, with the industry, and we just started jamming. And we were jamming in a carriage house in Wareham, and after jamming for about 2 years, decided to play out. And the name of the band actually comes from a play I had written back when I was in New York. It was a joke. The band was the product of a mixed musical marriage, so they were the Groovalados. And they were like,
I like that.
They were like, yeah, they were all like, I like that name. So
I like that.
So that ended up becoming then the name of the band, the Groovalados. And how would I describe the Groovalados? If Parliament Funkadelic and the Grateful Dead had a love child, and then they left that love child to be raised by Curtis Mayfield and James Brown, that's the Groovalados.
I like that. I like that. And no matter what, I could listen to it.
Yeah.
Even when and there is change up. When you guys are, different things that you come up with and created. You can see the change, whether it goes from you to your son, and it just goes back and forth, and it's from the young to the old, to the mixture of both. And I like that. I really do.
Well, the musicology with it. Our bassist was a rather interesting one because, like I said, you had James Wolfe, who was from Detroit, and he was like, it was interesting because he was the white boy jamming at the Black Panther parties,
Yes.
As a teenager,
Yes.
that kind of guy. And you have Billy, whose background was Southern soul. His family's from Georgia and Mississippi, and he had that straight up Southern funk.
Yeah, started from the church somewhere,
And
with
then
him.
and then I'm coming out of New York, even though my father's side's from Mashpee. I grew up in New York City, and I have that New York musician, East Coast jazz background, classical jazz, etc. background, and of course the New York sound. The New York sound is sort of an amalgamation of the South with the Caribbean. Because we were both bringing that kind of, and it's like 3 strains of Caribbean, because you have the West Indian Caribbean, and then you have the Latin Caribbean, and then you have the folks who are coming up from Georgia and South Carolina and Virginia, and they're bringing that sound into New York.
Very nice.
So you have all of these different elements merging, and then what one of the places where Billy and I really merged musically was we're both hardcore, like Parliament Funkadelic, but we're the black guys playing with all the rock musicians. So I'm still traumatized about the keyboard part to jump, because you had to play Van Halen and whatnot as a young musician playing in bands on the Cape, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember. He's naming all the rock groups, and it's like, wow, another musician who can actually sing James Brown, who can actually. So that Jamie ended up having to leave the group because of arthritis. Billy and I decided to keep it going. We ended up then with a bass player called Redbone, the late Chris Sweeting.
Mm.
And he also had that Southern sound. His family is out of Georgia and so, we were playing that hard funk, and that became the
Very
basis of the
nice.
band. But one of the things that we talked about as a band is that a band is a philosophy, not the individual players. So it is that we have to be a soul funk band, and when you're a soul funk band, it means that you have, one of the common denominators of a groovalato is we all played in the jazz band in high school.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have that jazz background to be a groovalato.
Yeah.
And now when you cross-reference that, you had to have a jazz background to be a session player for Motown. You had to have a jazz background to be one of the session players in the Brill Building. You had to have somewhat of a jazz background if you were making the music in Memphis,
Mm-hmm.
down there with Stax and whatnot. So looking at those common denominators, like I said, you look at templates and you look at blueprints.
Yeah.
And the fact that the band grew out of jam sessions and just sort of like, wonder what it would sound like if we took this person's song but we flipped it like this.
Mm-hmm.
If we did it like that. It doesn't need to sound like the record. You want to hear the record, go home and listen to the record. You want to hear the groovalato version, come listen to
Yeah.
we had that little bit of arrogance, but along with it, it was also like, we're going to give it a dance beat that at least going to make you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Even if
Yeah.
you don't like the version, you're going to at least be like, all right, now.
Mm-hmm.
So, but with that philosophy, I remember Billy also said we're probably the only band that trains our replacement. Enters Zig,
Mm-hmm.
who
How's it going, y'all?
becomes
I'm Zig.
becomes Billy's student when he's 10,
Wow.
and by 11 is headlining the Boston Jazz Festival as a featured
Very
star
nice.
tomorrow drummer, and by 15 is getting his own Grammy nominations in hip hop because he's been out performing, drumming, and rapping, but studied with Billy. And then, of course, when Billy's untimely passing,
Mhm.
he's able to slide into the role and comes with his own sound as a drummer.
Mm-hmm.
Redbone passes away. We have, for a while, our bass player was my left hand.
Yeah.
On a synthesizer.
Wow.
And then enters Chuck.
Mm-hmm.
And with Chuck, we're, of course, we end up with two blessing bass players. One is a bass player by the name of Richard Johnson from Boston, who's a straight up session gigging player.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to like Cathay Pacific in Quincy, the Chinese restaurant where
True.
they have like bands,
Yeah.
once upon a time he was in every single band's picture. He was their bass player.
Wow.
So he was the bass player. He was a groovalato bass player. He was the Showtime band bass player.
Mm-hmm.
He was the E Street band bass player.
There have been multiple occasions where we have had a show in Boston and we've been playing with Richard, and it's multiple bands on the bill.
And he's on with all of them.
Every one of them.
Yeah.
It's like at the Boston Jazz Fest a couple of
Yes.
times. He's with us. He's with Pat Baxton. He's with this one, that one, and that one
Yeah.
too.
So he's getting paid every waking moment.
But then enters the quiet genius of our guitarist, bass player, music teacher, chief engineer,
Mm-hmm.
Chuck V. So going back, one of my interests always was recording, even doing session work, producing records, I was doing a lot of house music records
Mhm.
and acid jazz records on the underground circuit, and working with that. In producing the Groovalatos record, the first one, Ask Your Mama, that we decided was going to be a straight up art record.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to make a record the way they made records back in the early 70s. So we didn't use any electronics. We didn't use, except of course for the recording process.
Mm-hmm.
But like all the hand claps for people around the microphone clapping
Yeah.
their hands, all the tambourines,
Hey.
real tambourines, real drums, real bass, real harmonies, real stuff going out of key, all of that. We wanted to capture that on the record, just like you had with the old Curtis Mayfield records. Before we went in and laid down the basic tracks, I remember I made a CD that was basically it was the Superfly album,
Mm-hmm.
the Sweet Sweetbacks. I know I can't say that on the radio, but the Sweet Sweetback Melvin Van Peebles, the soundtrack album to that movie,
Yeah.
and What's Going On album by Marvin Gaye. I made a playlist, and that's all we listened to for 2 weeks before we went in the studio to lay down the Ask Your Mama album.
It's kind of your own pep rally, Definitely.
It was an interesting thing, and then of course the validation was was getting Grammy nominations for it.
Mm-hmm.
And not even winning, or because it was like, we got nominated. Who cares if you win?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
The people who matter picked this record. Yeah, so it was,
The-
people whose opinion shapes things. They at least we caught their attention from playing on the street, so it was kind of cool.
There's a lot of credit. How do I want to say this? When you say Grammy nominated, it's that's something that you can use for your lifetime, and
Yeah,
it gives you that credit.
yeah,
It gives you that credit that obviously you deserve, and so when people like myself and others try to give you some gigs, it's you gotta pay you right, do you right, and
yeah.
but the one thing I want to do is just continue to support you as much as I can.
Appreciate it.
Everything that you're possibly doing, I'm trying to, I'm trolling your pages. I'm doing whatever I can just so I can share them. Been kind of hectic, kind of busy with me
Yeah,
this
yeah.
week, so I've been not doing it. Like I didn't even produce a reel about you guys. I wanted a reel. I wanted to do stuff, get a
Nice.
combination of all the stuff that you have,
That
and
just
kind
means
of put it together.
that just means you gotta bring us back on. That's
Yeah, I'll bring you
Yeah.
back on.
all. But
I can
what
definitely do
And
that.
like get clips from this interview here.
one thing
Uh-huh. Yes.
one thing definitely want to shout out is we're doing a street concert.
Where's that?
That's going to be actually right over on Purchase Street, 634 Purchase. We're doing that on July 21st.
July 21st.
And
Actually, I
it's
did see that. Yes, I
and
did.
doing that right across from City Hall. And I'm gonna be straight up about this. You have City Hall who puts together a concert series, an outdoor concert series. If you can hire N Train, why can't you hire the This and That band?
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
you can hire the Funky White Honkies, why can't you hire the Groovalados?
Yes.
Funky White
What
Honky
what
is
what
crazy.
what the city of New Bedford continually does is practices cultural erasure.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why we're doing the street concert the exact same day as the Funky White Honkies is it's like you're not going to erase us.
Yes. I like
So,
that.
so that's why we're doing
Thumbs up.
that's why
I
we're
love
doing a
that.
street concert, because it's sort of like that's why we're doing it right across from City Hall.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, and we're even doing it so that we can go hand out our flyers at the Funky White
True.
Honky
Yeah.
concert, you know,
That's it.
and tell people, hey, you want to hear some real stuff? So that's
Mm-hmm.
why we have those posters all over the city saying real
Yeah.
soul and funk. We're real about that.
All right.
You know,
What's that date again?
It's going to be July 21st
All right.
at 634 Pleasant Street, the Interwoven Art Studio.
All right.
What time?
And we're going to hit at about 7 o'clock.
All right. Let's see. I want to play something of yours, so I'm gonna
Ooh, something hours.
see what can we do. We're gonna let's see. We're gonna play this. Here we go. All right, you are listening to WNB1 Radio. We're going to mute you on the restream on Facebook so we don't pay any penalties. But please listen to WNB1 Radio on your devices, Apple or Android, and add it to your, 24 hours, 7 days out of the week. We're playing special music. I need y'all to add it to your devices while you're on the road, walking, whatever. You get to listen to things like the Groovalados and many, many more hip hop artists, R&B artists. So I'm gonna play a song for you. We'll be back in a few minutes. Meanwhile, stay tuned on Facebook and Restream, but also on the radio station. Let's see. You are listening to WNB1 Radio. I'm Charlie Perry, serving you R&B music on the rocks, chilled music with a chilled host, and where you get to listen to the music you love the most here on WNB1 Radio. My guests here today are the Groovalados.